I'm Roger Lay with the Vietnamese American Heritage Foundation. We're here to interview Joseph Ant Gao on July 24th, 2010 at the Washington, D.C. SPTN Center. Could you please state your name?
My name is Quang, U.S. Congressman.
Where were you born?
I was born in Saigon, Vietnam.
Could you tell me about your earliest memory in Vietnam?
Well, much of the time in Vietnam I spent in school, primary school. I attended kindergarten, first grade, and second grade in Vietnam. And my memories in Vietnam were that of an 8-year-old child playing with friends, going to school. Occasionally there were a couple of bomb scares, but besides that, life in a during during a period of war, would say at times stressful, but much of the time was very much concentrated on studying and playing around with my friends.
What kind of occupations did your parents have?
My father was a military officer, and my mother was a housewife.
Could you go into more detail about your father?
My father was, I believe, he was either a lieutenant or a captain in the South Vietnamese Army. He stationed for a period of time in Camo. Before that, I cannot remember all of his specific locations, but he spent most of his, I would have to say all of his professional career as a military officer.
Did he go to a re-education camp, or?
He did. After the Vietnam War in 1975, he was put into the Vietnamese re-education camps for about 7 years.
Did you ever visit him?
No, I was here in the United States, so I couldn't able to visit.
Before you left for the United States, what was the last form of contact with your father before he was imprisoned?
Well, I did not have a chance to speak or even to see my father before he was in prison. I left before he even got home, so my knowledge of my father being in the prison camp was relayed to me by my mother.
When did you leave for the United States, and how did you?
I left Vietnam in late April of 1975, and I actually flew out of Vietnam on one of the U.S. military airplanes.
Could you go back to that day and tell us how you felt when you were leaving the country?
Well, I remembered it was in the middle of the night. We were sleeping in, I believe it was a bowling. We were sleeping on one of the bowling facilities, and they woke us up. Everybody rushed onto a bus. There were, I guess, a lot of commotion, a lot of anxiety, and we went from the bus and rushed onto a military airplane, and we took off. So the period was chaotic, I would have to say, with people not knowing what's going to happen, with people being very fearful for their future, So it was not at all a pleasant moment.
Who else did you go with? to America?
I left Vietnam with an older sister and a younger brother, and we left with my aunt and her family.
When you arrived to the United States, where did you stay?
After we left Vietnam, we spent about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks in Guam. It was during my time at Guam that I met up with an uncle who eventually took me in and raised me. We left Guam after about 4 weeks, and then we went straight to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and stayed there for about 6 months before we were sponsored by a wealthy elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harold Schrock, who was living in Goshen, Indiana. So we moved from Fort Chaffee to Goshen, and I lived there the first 4 years of the new life here in the United States.
Could you go into more detail about the contrast of living with that wealthy elderly couple as opposed to Vietnam?
Well, I guess the contrast, obviously when you're talking about conveniences like for first time being able to use a flush toilet, being able to have running water, because in Vietnam our house simply, we had I guess for many of the houses of middle income people, we did not have running water. Much of the water was collected into this tub, and we used the water from the tub. But the life during the first several years were quite difficult. Lonely, obviously, being away from my parents and my sisters and my siblings, and at times very fearful, because I was only 8 years old, being exposed to a new culture, a new way of life, and much of the time I was by myself. So those were difficult moments, but I believe that it was also a learning experience, in the sense that I had to face my fears and learn how to overcome them.
So, if your sisters weren't with you, where did they reside?
My sister was raised in a foster home in another state, and then my brother was raised by the aunt who we left with. And when they first came, I believe they were residing in Georgia.
When did you first reunite with them?
With my brothers and sisters?
After you split up into different parts of the country?
I can't remember the exact time, but I believe it might have been maybe a year or year and a half or so after we came to the United States.
How did it make you feel to be divided like that?
Well, saddened of course. I would prefer that I'd be near my sister and my brother, but given the circumstances, it was something that was unavoidable, and to be able to meet up with them after that period of time, obviously was a exciting as well as a joyful moment. But at the same time, we knew that we couldn't stay together. So.
What schools did you go to in Indiana?
I went to an elementary school. Instead of putting me into third grade, they actually put me back into first to start school from the very beginning. So I started first grade, and obviously at 8, 9 years old, I was older than all of the first graders. But I believe that it was also the right decision because it enabled me to start learning at the level as everyone else, and was able to learn the basics of the English language, as you probably know, can be quite challenging. So.
Did you stay in Indiana for the rest of your schooling, or?
I stayed there till 1979, and then my uncle got married, and he and his family and we moved down to Mississippi. Lived there for a year, where I attended where I attended 6th grade. I actually skipped 5th grade. I went from 4th to 6th, and then afterwards, in 1980, we moved to Houston, where I finished middle school, and then attended high school in Houston at Jersey Village High School, and graduated in the spring of 1986, I believe.
What made you decide to go to Baylor University?
When I graduated from high school, I had an interest in becoming a medical doctor. So I chose Baylor because it had a good reputation and a good pre-med program. So I chose Baylor because of my desire in wanting to be a medical doctor.
And what was the major you chose while attending Baylor?
Well, I always had the passion for physics, and I still do have the same passion for physics. So I majored in physics as I was studying pre-med during the time that I was also studying pre-med courses at Baylor University. And so after Baylor, I decided not to go to medical school, and was debating between going to graduate school in physics or to join the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, to become a Catholic priest, because besides being a physicist or wanting to be a physicist, I also had this desire of serving God and to help people since I was very young, and I met a priest at Baylor University who inspired me and brought back that desire. And so after graduating with a bachelor degree in physics, I again made a fundamental option and chose not to pursue physics, but rather or at least to delay getting a graduate degree in physics, and to first join the Society of Jesus, hoping that I can get a PhD while I was in the Society of Jesus.
Did your parents give you any advice or suggestions?
During the time my parents were still back in Vietnam, all of the decisions that I had to make, I made through my own volition with the assistance of the friend of mine who was a priest. But I made those decisions on my own.
How, did you communicate with your parents through letters or anything?
I did. I at least my mother recall receiving a letter from me, and I guess hearing that I wanted to become a Catholic priest. So I believe that I did write to my mother a letter, telling her that was my intention.
How long were you at the seminary?
I spent 6 years in the Jesuit seminary, and I have to say that those 6 years were quite a learning experience. I get to follow, or at least I was able to do many of the things that I wanted to do, working with the poor, going to foreign countries to work with the poor, work with the refugee camps in Hong Kong with Vietnamese refugees. I was able to get a graduate degree in philosophy and taught philosophy for a year. So my time in the Society of Jesus was a stepping stone, really, to a political life, because it was in the Society of Jesus that I felt compelled to move in a direction that would enable me to promote social change, to try to alleviate the suffering that I saw in the world. And I thought at that time that the best way to do that was to affect social policies that will enable the poor, enable those who are less privileged to have the opportunity to excel, to help themselves.
What made you leave the seminary life?
Again, the decision was based on, one, the desire to be involved in the political system, which Pope John Paul II made a policy decision not allowing priests to be politically involved. So I had to make a choice between my desire to be a priest or my desire to become a politician, and I chose the latter. Obviously, I left the Society of Jesus, and besides, there were other issues in connection with that decision. But ultimately, I left the Society of Jesus in '96 after teaching philosophy at Loyola University in New Orleans for a year, and then I came up here to Northern Virginia, where I taught middle school for 1 year, and during the time I also was preparing for the LSAT. I took the LSAT, applied, and got accepted into law school. And while I was up here in Virginia, I volunteered with Boat People SOS, and I accompanied Dr. Tang, who was and still is the executive director of Boat People SOS, to the Hill, to Capitol Hill, and was able to advocate for policies, for issues that affect the Vietnamese community. And it was during my short period up here, living in Virginia, and also working on issues on the Hill, that basically solidified my decision to follow the political path. And the first step, based on the plan that I had for myself, was to get a law degree. So I went back to New Orleans, attended law school in New Orleans. While attending law school, I was also involved in the local church, working in the parish to address issues that affected the community, taught catechism, and also was an adjunct professor at Loyola, teaching philosophy while I was in law school.
How did you get involved with politics in Louisiana?
Well, I guess my desire to be involved in politics was a desire that stems back to the time when I was in the Society of Jesus. But as they say, to be successful in the political arena is all about timing.
And what happened during that time in Louisiana?
Right. Basically, I was looking for an opening in order to dive into the political field, and it occurred after Hurricane Katrina. Right after Katrina, 80% of the city of New Orleans was devastated. Much of the city was destroyed. The New Orleans, the Vietnamese community in New Orleans East moved back quite quickly and were able to rebuild very, very quickly, much more rapidly than other sectors of the city. And we were able to move back and to rebuild because of the community unity, as well as through the leadership of the community members like Father Viet Nguyen, who was the pastor of Mary Queen of Vietnam. And it was during that time that the Vietnamese community received a lot of local as well as national media attention because of our ability to recover from a disaster very quickly and to be able to rebuild without having to rely much on government assistance. And it was at that time when we were also trying to fight a landfill that the city wanted to open up very close to the community. So I took part in the fight against the landfill, and it was that time that Representative Mike Honda from California came to New Orleans, doing some of his duties in the Asian Pacific Islanders communities. And he came down to Mary Queen of Vietnam, spoke with the community, and I attended the town hall meeting, and he challenged a Vietnamese to run for public office. And I remembered that even before Representative Mike Honda came down to New Orleans, I was looking at the political landscape and had made the decision to run for public office, to run for state representative office. And so when he posed that challenge, I was there, and I actually raised my hand and said, I will run for the state representative seat this year, which was 2007. So that's what I did. I qualified to run for state rep, District 103, in a field of 6 people. I was the only one to qualify from New Orleans. I ran against 5 other people from an adjacent parish, St. Bernard. Much of District 103 obviously encompasses St. Bernard. Only 30% of the district is in New Orleans. So I came in 5th out of 6 in my first race. I was disappointed, obviously, but not but I did not give up. I thought that it was something that I had to do because of this desire to promote social change. So I was looking for other opportunities to run for public office. It was during my race for the state representative seat that I caught the eye of a former chairman of the Louisiana State's Republican Party, Mr. Brian Wagner. He called me into his office wanting to donate to my campaign for the state seat, and he told me whether I win or lose, he would want to sit down and discuss with me about other opportunities in the future. So after I lost the race for the state seat, I took up his offer and went to his office and discussed with him about other political opportunities, and he asked me to join him to campaign for John McCain for president and to be part of the Republican Party because I was at that time an independent. So because John McCain had a long history serving in Vietnam, he was a POW, and of all the candidates that were in the field, I would have supported John McCain anyways. So I decided to join the Republican Party and to campaign for John McCain. And I was able to become a delegate to take part in the Republican National Convention in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was right before the convention that Hurricane Gustav struck New Orleans. So I had to drive my wife and my 2 children from New Orleans all the way to Minneapolis to attend the convention up there. It was during my time up there that I found out that my house got flooded the second time in 4 years. But again, that was another struggle that I had to go through, trying to be a delegate. And that time I was also already qualified for the congressional seat to run against whoever the Democratic candidate was, because of a change in the federal election system in New Orleans. So I thought that was a good opportunity for Vietnamese to run as a Republican because of the change in the federal election laws. And when we looked at the race, obviously no one gave me a chance. The district is a minority district comprised of 60% African American, only 2% Asian, and the rest is Caucasian and Hispanic, comprised of Caucasian and Hispanic. And being an Asian Republican, no one gave me the chance in that race. But then, again, it comes back to the issue of faith. I had great faith in myself, as well as I had faith in a God that leads me to where He wants me to be. So I continue to struggle and to fight for this congressional seat, and things that had to happen to my benefit if I were to win did happen. Everything. So at the end, we were able to garner enough support from the city and enough votes to enable me to be elected to the U.S. Congress.
How does your Roman Catholic faith aid you in your decision making?
Well, I've always been very in some ways religious. During the time that I was teaching at Loyola, and also during the time that I practiced law, I continued to have a spiritual director, talking to him about my desires, and talking and discussing with him about what is God's goal for me in life. So much of my Catholic faith and much of my, I guess, ability to discern, I learned in the society of Jesus, obviously. But at the same time, I guess my faith enabled me to have the strength, to have the determination to continue doing what I do in face of overwhelming odds. And during the campaign, actually, I alluded to the story of David and Goliath, because I was in David going against a Goliath, a person who has been the foundation of the African American political structure for almost 2 decades. And again, that was a story of faith, and I saw my own story as a story of faith, where I depended on a power beyond myself to help me to win, and that was what happened.
Many people see you as the beacon of Vietnamese Americans, and they have very high expectations. How do you handle their expectations and bring them more to a Earth-like layer? Or
Well, I don't let people's expectations influence what I do. All through my life, I have a goal set out, and I will do everything that I can to achieve the goal, and not to be persuaded or dissuaded in one way or the other. So again, there are expectations from the Vietnamese American community, and obviously my desire is also to achieve much of the desires and goals of the Vietnamese American community, to bring about democracy in Vietnam, to strengthen the Vietnamese community, the Vietnamese American community in the United States, but I do it not out of people's expectations, but I do it because I feel that it is a duty of a Vietnamese American to help bring up the Vietnamese community here in the United States, and to bring about change in Vietnam. I feel that it's a duty of me, as well as a duty of everyone else in the community, because if we were to be not involved, if we as Vietnamese American were to not do anything to help our own community, then we cannot expect anyone else to do that. So my desire to be a successful congressman, to bring about and to help accomplish the goals that I have set out as a U.S. congressman, to help elevate the Vietnamese American community, as well as to bring change to our society in Vietnam. Those desires do not grow out of people's expectations, but they grow out of my own goals and my own perception of duty as something that each person in the Vietnamese community each person has the responsibility to do.
What has been your most difficult decision professionally as a Congress member, and your most difficult decision personally?
I guess the most difficult decision as a member of Congress centered on a couple of very high-profile votes, especially during the healthcare debates. The healthcare bill focuses on the needs of this country's, I guess, need to reform the medical field, the medical profession, to provide coverage for those who are uninsured, which is a very big problem in this country. But at the same time, how to do it responsibly. And one of the issues that I am very concerned with and have been concerned with for a long time is the issue of abortion. For me, abortion is an absolute evil. It cannot be supported under any circumstance, and it would be unconscionable for me to support a program that would have fundings to expand abortion. And that was part of the healthcare debates. In the House bill, we were able to get strong language to prohibit the federal fundings of abortion. So I was able to support the House version of the healthcare reform bill. But the Senate bill stripped the language of the House and put in a compromise language that would open the door for government expansion of abortion. And it is something that I cannot support. It was something that I did not support in the Senate bill. And therefore, I voted against the Senate version, knowing very well that it was something that was very popular in the Democratic sector of my district. But I see my role as a congressman that I must make the right decisions for my district. I must make the right decisions for my people, and I must put the needs of my people ahead of my own needs. But at the same time, my decisions cannot force me to compromise some of the moral values that I hold dear, and one of them is obviously is the value of life. And I could not support any program that would seek to expand abortion, an absolute evil that have destroyed over 50 million lives since Roe v. Wade. So I voted against the Senate bill. So that was the hardest decision of my professional career as a U.S. Congressman so far. I'm pretty sure that there will be other difficult decisions in the future if I were to win re-election in the coming years. The toughest decision for me personally, when it concerns my personal life, is to have my wife and my kids stay in New Orleans while I work up here in Washington, D.C. And that continues to be a struggle because obviously I spend a good time here on the Hill 3 to 4 days out of the week. So I'm away from my family much of the time, which is being a father and also a husband. those are difficult challenges because as a father, I always want to be around my two daughters, going to their birthday parties, going to their piano recitals, going to different functions at school. But I had to miss all of those functions because of my duties here on the Hill. And then obviously it's also a terrible burden on my wife, who is not only does she have to represent me while I'm not in the district, she's also a pharmacist, and she works. She continues to work as a pharmacist, and at the same time she has to raise our two daughters, by herself down in New Orleans. So those are very, very difficult decisions that we made, and continue have to make until possibly, hopefully, this coming November, if we were to be victorious, then obviously we might look at our family situation and make decisions otherwise. But that was a very difficult decision.
What will it take for you to be re-elected this next election?
Well, obviously, a great amount of support from the district, which I've been receiving. I think people are happy with what I've been doing so far, with the decisions that I've made, as well as the high moral values that I hold. People want a strong leader. People want a leader who is able to make good moral decisions. And I've been able to do that. At the same time, I have been also quite effective in getting money down to the district to rebuild post-Katrina, and now to contend with the oil spill. In the past 18 months or so, I have brought it down to the district, or I have affected in bringing down to the district billions of dollars in recovery money, to fight crime, to rebuild infrastructures, to expand the roadways, to look at streetcar projects, to look at economic development, healthcare. So that has been quite positive for the many people of my district who are still struggling to rebuild after Katrina. And I've been very good at reaching out to my constituents, talking, listening to them, and try to address their needs. So to be reelected, obviously, I need a tremendous of support from my own constituents, which I have been able to receive. But at the same time, also, I need great support from the Vietnamese American communities all over the United States, because to win an election requires a lot of money. That is the reality of it. And I am not I'm not independently wealthy to be able to fund my own campaign. So much of the support that I need has to come from my supporters, from the Vietnamese American communities. So those are the challenges. To find ways to raise money, as well as to make sure that the needs of my people, of my constituents, are being cared for.
Earlier this year, you spoke with the president of BP of America, and you told him what they would do in these old samurai days. Could you explain your thought process behind and what you said to him?
I was attending a hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee, which was, I was not a member of that committee. I was invited to attend the committee because of the oil spill, because I represent a district devastated by the oil spill. Before I spoke, there was another member who spoke. and he asked the CEO of BP America to resign. And I was sitting there thinking, I said, this guy, he's a millionaire. If he were to resign, he would just have to go and relax at a beach resort somewhere, while we continue to struggle down in the Gulf Coast. And as I was sitting there thinking, I was thinking about this, about the Asian culture and about the Japanese culture, and what would, if I were to live in the Japanese samurai days, what would they do? And obviously, the custom during that period was to offer a person who has caused calamities that affected other people, that has caused suffering to other people, and that has been a disappointment to in his life honorably. And that was the thought, but my main intention in addressing the issue to BP, to the BP executive, is to let them know very clearly how disappointed we were with the capping of the well, with the cleaning up process, as well as with the claims process. I was not serious about asking him to commit harakiri, obviously, but the statement was a very strong statement that conveys the disappointment that I was feeling, as well as my people, my constituents were feeling. It conveyed a sense of anger, as well as a sense of anxiety that I and my people were feeling because of the oil spill. And I was asking him that, in some ways, it's not enough for you to resign. That you have to do things a lot better in order to address the needs of the people who are affected, as well as they have to do much better to help the economy and the environment along the Gulf Coast to recover in the long term. So that was my main point, and I'm pretty sure that he got my point quite well, that he understood it quite well, I believe.
Could you elaborate more on how your constituents feel by the oil spill, and talk more about detail about how their daily lives are affected?
Well, obviously there is much more stress. People are fearful of for their future. There is much anxiety. Much of the seafood industry was shut down for several months now. The moratorium against deep water drilling has affected the economy of the Gulf Coast, as well as very dramatically for the state of Louisiana. Our tourism industry is affected because of this. Small businesses are affected because of this oil spill. So when you're looking at the health impact as well as the economic impact, the oil spill has been devastating for the people. But then again, the people of Louisiana, we are very resilient people. We've encountered many calamities, as well as our ability to overcome those calamities have been quite explicit in the last several years post-Katrina. So we will recover from this oil spill, but obviously there are issues that we have to address: health issues, economic issues, and we have to find, and I will find, every single means to help my constituents to recover from this oil spill.
Have you spoken to any Vietnamese fishermen in the area?
Oh, of course, many times. I know exactly what they are struggling with. The ability to get, to file claims, to get adequate compensations, language access, to understand those claims, to help involve in the vessel of opportunity programs, to be involved in other programs that would help them to sustain until the area fully recovers. So I've spoken to many Vietnamese fishermen and know exactly the struggles and the issues that they are facing.
How can we help with the recovery of Louisiana?
I guess at this time, there's very little that you can do. Besides going down there, volunteer to be an interpreter or to, if you are a medical provider, maybe to go down there and volunteer in those clinics that addresses mental health issues. But at this time, much of the help must come from the claims process, must come from the different federal as well as state programs that are out there. Because the economic impact to the region will be in the billions of dollars. So unless you have $1 billion, it's going to be difficult. And even if we were to raise funds in the amount of millions of dollars, that would only be a drop in the bucket. So much of the assistance, much of the help must come from BP as well as from the different levels of government. I believe that the greatest need right now is to help the Vietnamese Americans to have access to those programs.
What advice would you give to a young Vietnamese American who would be interested in politics in the future?
Well, I would advise the person, he or she, to be involved in the community, to understand the issues that affect the Vietnamese American communities, as well as to be involved in the local political infrastructure of where he or she lives. The old saying goes, and it's very true, that all politics is local. You have to know the people who will vote for you. They have to know who you are in order to vote for you. So for our young people who are interested in the political life, obviously there must be much involvement, social involvement at different levels to help in the various communities, to be involved with the NAACP, for instance, to be involved with the local branch of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or what have you, to be involved in your church or your temple, to advocate for the issues of minorities, to advocate for issues of equality, to advocate for social change. Those are all of the things that any person can do. And I would encourage that our young people to do that. And that would be the first step.
Going back a little bit, could you describe your relationship with President Obama?
We have a very good relationship, actually. We have a very good working relationship. I've been working very closely with the President and his administration in the past 18 months on the recovery of New Orleans, and I'm thankful and very grateful for him and for his administration in everything that they have done in order to help my district to recover from Katrina and also to recover from the oil spill. So we've had a great relationship, even though I'm a Republican and the President is a Democrat. But we're able to look beyond the issue of party politics and to be focused on what we need to do in order to help those who are in need. And that's the desire that both he and we have. What is the right decision? What do we need to do in order to make the right decisions for the country, as well as the right decisions for the people that we serve? So we have a tremendous relationship, and I hope to continue a very good working relationship with the President and his administration in the future.
Being on the Hill, how do you sense the political bipartisanship?
There is no bipartisanship on the Hill, and it's because of the culture on the Hill of how rules are structured, where the majority party controls all legislations, and also very much the rules and some of the procedures are reflective of the leader members. If they want to engage other members of the minority party, they can, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. So there is very little bipartisanship on the Hill, and that is a great disappointment to me. It seems that the main focus of the majority is to remain in the majority, and the focus of the minority party is to somehow be a majority party. It's not about making the right decisions. It's about what I do to remain the majority party, or what I must do to become the majority party. And that, I guess, for me, skewed notion of goals is what detrimental to us making the right decisions for the country, as well as making the right decisions for the people that we serve.
If you could go back in time, what would you change for your when you gained your seat into Congress? What would you have changed in your campaign?
Nothing, because obviously I'm sitting here as a youth congressman, so that I was able to make the right decisions and to win. So I would not change anything with respect to the campaign or anything that I've done in the past 18 months.
That's all the questions I have for now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.